This is Anthony Stine, PhD, with the Practical Carnivore, and I'm here to tell you that once again, the media is abuzz with anti-meat stories. We have one from Consumer Reports that should be getting a lot of attention, but really is not. They recently did a study about ground meat of various kinds and found E. coli present in about 1 in 3 packages that you will find in your typical grocery store. And apparently, it's an especially dangerous strain of E. coli because it's not permitted by law to be in meat to begin with. You might be thinking any E. coli is probably not permitted. And that's probably true, but they made sure to let us know that this was a particularly nasty strain of E. coli. The story is itself getting amplified by media, but a lot of carnivores and people in the carnivore adjacent world like keto and paleo aren't talking about this. And I am not trying to scare you off of ground meat here. If ground meat is your main go-to for the carnivore diet, please don't let this news scare you off, because we're going to talk about probably what's underlying this today. Let's really understand the story. The food supply is tightening up. Supply lines are strained, and now the powers that shouldn't be are trying to persuade you to eat what is basically pet food for human beings. It's Consumer Reports telling us anything really new when they issued this report warning us about this. No, it's nothing new. We know that ground meat from the store is something that you should probably cook pretty thoroughly before you eat it. I mean, if you're eating undercooked ground meat that you bought from a rancher or from a source who you trust, that might be a different story. But most of us know not to eat, raw ground beef that you picked up at Walmart. That's probably just advisable at this point. We know to cook it, medium to at least before we eat it. Now, Consumer Reports ran this headline, and I'm going to tell you that, again, why Consumer Reports is important on this, because they have a lot of sway in the marketplace. They have a lot of trust. People see something for Consumer Reports and they take it face value. So here's the headline. Is our ground meat safe to eat? CR tested 351 packages of ground meat and found dangerous bacteria in almost a third of the chicken samples we bought, deadly bacteria in ground beef, and worrisome gaps in the way meat is regulated in this country. The regulation comment here is interesting because that is something that we'll talk about here in another story just a second. The gist is all there. 1 package in 3 of ground meat had E. coli or other bacteria that are prohibited by current regulation. Are we really surprised by this? None of us should be. Most of us know, again, not to eat store-bought ground meat raw. But why is this coming out now when we're hearing reports from ranchers and farmers that the meat is going to be expensive and possibly in short supply this fall and winter? It may have something to do with this. From the regulatory review, we get this story: preparing the new market for meat alternatives. There it is. It's about money and how cheap the alternatives to meat are to produce compared to beef. They plan to price most of us out of the market when it comes to traditional meat, and they're going to do this in the name of, we'll call them thermometer-related issues. Now, the people pushing this might not have noticed that Beyond Meat and the rest of that glorified pet food isn't selling very well. I mean, Beyond Meat's stock price has crashed. We know this. We laugh about this on Instagram. If you're following me or anybody else on Instagram, we all love to sort of point and laugh at this. But here's the money quote from the article. It's pretty revealing. Quote, consumers are increasingly turning to alternatives to traditional meat. The sale of plant-based meat has more than doubled in the United States in recent years, rising by 148% from 2019 to 2020 alone. As an aside, going from an extremely niche market to something that's still a niche market and having a 148% increase isn't saying much. Let's be real. If you're only selling, $5 million in the marketplace, and then you suddenly go to $12 million, guess what? That's about a 150% increase. But let's continue with the quote. Some experts project that the plant-based meat industry will grow into a $252 billion with a B dollar market by the end of the decade. Unlike older meat alternatives such as veggie burgers, plant-based meat is specifically designed to taste and feel like real meat. Yet another booming industry is not merely a meat-like alternative, it is real meat. Cultured meat is meat grown in a laboratory from cells taken from living animals. It does not require any animal slaughter, and some researchers find that it could have a significantly smaller carbon footprint than traditional meat. Although cultured meat is not yet commercially available in the United States, experts project that the cell-based meat industry will achieve price parity with conventional meat By 2025, cell-based meat may, quote, significantly disrupt the traditional meat market as it provides real animal meat with fewer environmental harms. In this uncharted territory of neither plant-based meat alternatives nor traditional meat, policymakers must create a regulatory framework for the soon-to-be booming cell-based meat industry. In 2019, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the U.S. Department of Agriculture reached an agreement to regulate cell-based meat jointly to ensure that when it comes to market, cell-based meat is safe and properly labeled. The FDA will oversee cell collection, banking, and growth, while the USDA will conduct safety inspections and develop labeling for cell-based meat. End quote. So let's be clear. The same people who can't keep USDA processing plants safe enough to prevent E. coli are going to keep cloned meat safe. Think about that for a second. There was a few months ago, you might be aware of this if you ever eat organs at all, you might be aware that a few months ago, all of a sudden finding liver in the store was very difficult, and it didn't have to do with supply chain disruption, didn't have to do with any of that. It came out that the big USDA processing plants in Texas all of a sudden couldn't process liver and related organs anymore because, as it turned out, they were having the random parasite issues that sometimes happens with organ meats. They weren't safe. The rest of the animal was perfectly fine to eat, but they could not legally sell the liver, so it just disappeared off the market. These are going to be the same people who are going to be in charge of regulating cloned meat. I'm more than a little skeptical about this, as you can tell, and that's not to mention the ridiculous claims about the impact of animal agriculture on all things thermometer related. That's way overblown, as people in our circles have talked about endlessly. We're talking 2% of the problem, if there is one. This is about money, and it's about control. For some reason, health experts are pushing processed foods on people, foods that you and I cannot hope to produce ourselves. Plenty of people raise cattle on their own. I mean, I live in central Oklahoma, and you could drive around the town I live in into some neighborhoods, take a turn from what looks like a normal neighborhood. All of a sudden, there's someone with a horse corral or, a cow in a larger than usual backyard. Plenty of people have 1 or 3 or 5 cows that they raise for their own meat in this country. That's not an unusual thing in the grand scheme of things. But who is going to make a slurry paste that is formed into patties that has allegedly enough protein in it to substitute for meat? Not the vast, vast majority of people who might otherwise be interested in producing their own food. And that's nothing to say about this cultured meat stuff. So that's probably what's going on here. This is about money, as well as some things going on overseas. If you're paying attention to what's going on in Denmark and soon to be Canada and other places related to nitrogen, that's what's going on here. This is about money. This is about control, especially when you look at who the big voices are. So don't let them fool you. Keep eating your meat. Get to know your local rancher. And remember, we call it the carnivore tribe for a reason. Underlying all of this is the concept of community. If you can buy your meat locally, do so. I understand if you're too broke to do it, a lot of that going around these days, but even if you just once in a while, buy a steak from a local rancher, you'll help them stay in business. You're going to find it's a much better tasting meat, and it's good to know where your meat comes from. And if these rumors about shortages are true, it might actually be a good idea to know who your local ranchers are. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this. Please like and subscribe if you haven't. It really does help. Go out and optimize your day today.